Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Inspirational Anna Show. We're here today and always, as usual, to inspire you, to encourage you, to let you understand that you're good just the way God made you. All right? Okay, we're going to go straight to our topic today. Our topic today is a bit heavy, but it's also a necessity that we discuss it and to equip people with the tools to deal with the topic of suicide. It's kind of heavy, but it's something that lives with us. It happens, and it's difficult to take and difficult to understand. So today, Prof. Mfoafo M'Carthy is here to discuss with me how to detect it, ways that we can prevent it, and anything else that go with it. So without any further ado, let's introduce our good man, Prof. Magnus Mfoafo M'Carthy. Hello, sir.
Good afternoon, madam.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, and thanks for having me here.
Always, as always, you bring us all this information that is needed that many people don't want to address. But thanks to you, you and I are working together to see how we can help society deal with issues that are difficult to deal with. Thank you for being consistent with us. So our topic today is about suicide. And we're going to go straight into, if you can explain to us what it means. We all have ideas and all of that, but if you can give us a bit more on that particular word, suicide.
Right. The term suicide was coined in the late 18th century. I'm getting my centuries confused. I think it was in the 1897. So that would be the late 19th century, let me put it that way. And it was a term used by a French sociologist by name Emile Durkheim. He came out with a seminal work within that period based on observation that he had made amongst Protestants and Catholics who were killing themselves. Perhaps maybe that's a term that would have been used around that time. And he came up with the word suicide. So the work that he produced is entitled Le Suicide. Le Suicide.
Okay.
And that was came out in 1897, and it was revised in 1951. So the term suicide in itself, this is how he explained it, and it's in page 44 of his book. And he says the term suicide is applied to all cases of death resulting directly or indirectly from a positive or negative act of the victim himself. So it could be himself, herself, or what have you, which he knows will produce this result. So an act that somebody, so it could be planned or maybe do it in a way that it could be accidental. So when I say plan, it could be maybe he or somebody putting a gun to the head or what have you, or perhaps maybe act in a way that will lead to suicide, right? So there are we hear a lot of terminologies like maybe murder by suicide or something. Somebody would do something and then maybe stand in front of the police, and every attempt to ask this person to put down your hand or maybe don't take the gun or what have you, they keep insisting. You see them walking towards the police with a gun and other things, and based on that, such a person may be killed. And then you look through the history of an individual and you realize that this person has been toying with the idea of wanting to kill him or herself over a period of time. So that is basically what his definition has been over the years. And I think it's also, we continue to use it in this day and age, but people are trying to maybe interpret it differently from time to time. Yeah.
Okay. So it's, I'm going to start with two very interesting, I don't know if I should use the word interesting, but people that we saw were happy, were very happy, were giving all of us smiles in society, seemed to not have any care in the world, but all of a sudden woke up one day and committed suicide, right? Sometimes we think, or we say that, oh, that person is so sad and this and that. So it doesn't surprise us when that person commits suicide. In this case, I'm talking about comedian Robin Williams and Anthony Bourdain, this gentleman who made eating so beautiful, traveling around the world, right? By all accounts, both gentlemen lacked nothing, at least from the outside, right? By all accounts, they had money, they had fame, they had families. They seemed to be living their life's passion. Whilst we cannot be specific as to why it happened and it has happened. So tell us, if you can, what would be the symptoms of, or what would cause a person that is so extremely happy to take their own lives in such a drastic way?
Thank you very much, Anna. In actual fact, we may not have the answers, but there are a few things we may want to look at. So the question that we may want to ask ourselves first and foremost is, there's something we call suicidal ideation. Suicidal ideation is having that thought process that lingers for a period of time, and usually when you go for counseling, social workers, psychologists, and psychiatrists may engage in conversation to find out exactly if you're entertaining that thought, and then there'll be intervention. We will talk about intervention later. But based on your question, what I want us to look at is perhaps maybe what causes somebody to get to that point. So that may lead us in answering your question. First and foremost, there is one thing we call the acute suicide risk. The acute suicide risk, we explain it to be this, where there is that intense wish and that feeling to want to kill yourself. And I don't know whether you've encountered that periodically. Maybe somebody will say, well, my girlfriend left me or something.
Oh, I have.
Yeah, and some go to the extent of wanting to killing themselves, right? That would be described as the acute suicide risk. So for instance, anytime we talk about it, this is what comes to. I remember in 1993, I was then in New York City, and there was an incident that occurred where a young guy at the age of 20 who's gained admission to NYU Medical School was killed, let me use, or even assassinated, let's use that word, because the perpetrator went to his home, knocked on the doorbell. When he opened the door, shot, there were about 20 bullets, so the guy, there was no way this guy would have died. It would have lived. A young man of Indian descent, brilliant, gained admission. But the genesis of the story is that he had engaged a young lady who happened to be also his culture and also brilliant student from NYU as well. And the perpetrator happened to be a person who had interest in a young lady. So when they got engaged, he realized he had no chance of, having access to this girl. So what he did is he decided to kill the man. So in his warped thought process, he felt by killing the young man, he would have access to the girl. But what had happened is, of course, he was arrested, and, the rest tells us what happened. But the young girl, during the process of grieving, the family lived in a story building. I think a number of story buildings. He jumped to her death.
The girl.
Yeah, the girl jumped to her death, and the outcome, some of the commentary, people said, well, in her culture, the belief is that by killing herself, she'll be joining, the husband,
her husband,
the would-be husband. So we have different people react to tragedy or other things differently based on where they are at, and what they are going through. And also there is the ongoing suicide, which is described as a long-term health issue. Some people may be struggling with health issues and things, and the pain and other things, they get to a point, they say, well, I don't want to live anymore. And then in Canada, we have right now, I think the legislation has been cleared where they call something doctor-assisted suicide. I don't know if you know about that, where you'll be helped based on your condition, will be assessed and other things, and then make a determination that you can do that. So these are some of the things that are there. And there are others who perhaps may be a long, prolonged mental illness. It could be depression or something where perhaps one day they get up, they can't do it anymore, and they feel the only way out is perhaps to kill themselves. Now, when you look through the literature speaks to the fact that individuals with depression have a higher percentage of
Mhm.
committing suicide than maybe the other person, the those who do not have the illness.
Right.
People who've been diagnosed with serious mental illness, like schizophrenia and other things, the percentage is also higher amongst this group of people. So what
Mhm.
happens is some of them, it gets to a point where perhaps maybe they feel the feeling is that they can't take it anymore, get to the
Mhm.
point of maybe wanting to end it all. So these are
Mhm.
some of the things. And when you look at Robin Williams, for instance, my understanding is I think at the time he had a debilitating health condition which
Okay.
was worsening. That
Mm.
was the report that I read. That was worsening, and hence perhaps that could be it, or perhaps maybe he had other underlying issues, be it mental
Issues.
illness or what have you. That perhaps maybe came to a point where he felt that he couldn't take it anymore, or he felt the
Mhm.
future was somewhat bleak, and as a
Mhm.
result, he felt he needed to end it all. Now,
Mhm.
talking about Anthony Bourdain, I'm not sure, but rumor had it, and I think I may have read it somewhere about he also having a history of mental illness, depression in particular, and
Okay.
perhaps it could be maybe a lingering something that maybe something precipitated it at that particular time where he felt
Right.
he had to end it all. So it
Right.
happens. I mean, usually what I say is the line between sanity. I'm sorry, I'm using the words insanity and sanity here, but the line between sanity and insanity is so slim. And that is where we always need to ensure that we take care of our mental health because
Mhm.
anything at all can trigger that. And that
Mhm.
means the end is likely to be quite disastrous. Now,
Mhm.
let me give you some statistics just to
Okay.
buttress the argument that I'm making.
Yes.
So now, talking about suicide, it's not something that is out of the ordinary. It occurs a lot in lots of cultures.
Okay.
Some cultures is embraced, others is frowned upon.
Right.
So we have two types of approaches. And I think the name Durkheim,
Mhm.
the father of the terminology suicide, uses the word anomie, Anomie. And with
Okay.
anomie, he describes it from two points of view. The first point is the idea of despair, due to an illness
Mhm.
or what have you, or
Mhm.
maybe the lack of disconnection from society, where we
Yes.
feel perhaps maybe no future for me and what have you, so I may have to end it all. And
Mhm.
then the second point, he looks at it from he uses the word altruism, where
Mhm.
people tend to be committed to a cause so much that they are willing to die for it. And
Right.
anytime we think about that, we think about groups like the Al Qaeda movement and all those
Mhm.
things, where because of religion or political affiliation or what have you, people are willing to go to the extreme of
Mhm.
doing it for the cause of it. Or even with some belief system, some religious beliefs, some feel that if I die as a martyr, you know, I may get a number of virgins and what have you.
You
And
know,
I mean, when you look at it critically, it all stems from this idea of committing suicide for a cause.
of course,
You know,
yeah.
that is basically what it is. And there are other forms, So for instance, right now in our day and age, I don't know whether you heard stories about the impact of social media on our
Mhm. Mhm.
youngsters, and things like that. Right now, the huge thing that the government and also governments in the Western world is fighting is this idea of cyberbullying,
Right.
where young children are being bullied on the net,
Social media.
because of their weight, their size, the color of their skin, and the list goes on and on and on. There's a particular story that I remember came out a few years ago, in Oklahoma, where
Mhm.
they said children between the ages, let me look at it, 4 and between 4 and 18 visited the hospital a lot within a certain period of time. And it showed that there was a 24% increase in hospital visitation when this movie, 13 Reasons Why, was shown
Mm.
on Netflix.
Okay.
And the reason was the show had to do with a fictional story of a young high school student who committed suicide.
Mhm.
So kids, by watching it, tended to imitate that, and that
Right.
really gave it.
Right.
There was an uptick on, kids want attempting to commit suicide, and
Mhm.
also there have been stories that we've been hearing about. Um, and I think kids, they said there was a game where you suffocate, you try to hold your breath,
Right.
your neck or something for a period of time where you can't breathe, and then at the end of the day, just at a point of suffocation or what have you, you let go. And it was a game that was being played where a lot of kids lost their lives.
I
And
remember that.
these are all activities that are around that really um, um, increase, the number of people committing suicide. There
Mm-hmm.
have also been instances where I remember in Ottawa, in Canada, here, a student at Carleton University died by committing suicide. And later, when investigated, they realized that she went on a website where somebody, a nurse in the United States, coached her into committing
Yes.
suicide. So these are all things, factors that lead, because they said this lady was suffering from depression. And perhaps she went to the site to get support or what have you. And
Yes.
they say, hey, why not end it all? Because it's safe to end it. So
Mm-hmm.
there are a number of factors that are out there. For instance, there's another story that came out in 2008 in Japan that talked about there was this information that you can take your life with hydrogen sulfide gas.
Mm-hmm.
And within a period of time, there were about 220 attempts. And out of the 220, 208 were successful. So
Wow.
these are the incidents that are out there, where people follow, or maybe based on their the mental health condition and other things, they are led into these things. So let me give you some figures. In Canada, in 2018, 4,157 people committed suicide. Not,
Wow.
not attempted, but committed
Actually
suicide.
succeeded.
That's right, succeeded. Worldwide, according to the World Health Organization in 2019, the figure that we have is 800,000. So
Wow.
almost a million. Yeah. So almost about a million
Worldwide.
worldwide in a year. So it speaks to the fact that the issue of suicide is really important. We need to have that conversation. We need
Yes.
to look at it because it's really affecting lives. And
Mm-hmm.
on the list, there was a kind of like, a map that was created. And on the list was this country, or Lithuania
Mm-hmm.
is the number one country. And when I looked it up, I realized that it wasn't maybe because of where they are located or anything, but a number of factors. This idea of despair, alcoholism, and the list
Mm-hmm.
goes on and on and on. So
Mm-hmm.
it's these are things that we need to take seriously.
Okay.
We don't have
Okay.
to kid with it. Yeah, it's important.
So now that you've given us these statistics, the question I have is suicide, um, is it more prevalent in certain communities or societies, right?
Hmm.
You know how sometimes they say if there's a disease or something, they say it's particular in this area
Hmm.
or it's particular in that area, this group of people, that
Hmm.
group of people.
Hmm.
I don't know if you know, but from statistics, does statistics show that there's a particular group of people that are prone to commit suicide?
Right now in Canada, we have the Indigenous community that are known to be prone for committing suicide. And it stems from a number of factors. Importantly, one can be poverty, this idea
Mm-hmm.
of hopelessness within the community, this idea of despair. Somebody can make a case and say, well, they were colonized about over 100 years ago, so they should let go with it. We need to realize that there is something we call the generational impact of abuse, the generational impact of
Mm-hmm.
oppression, the
Mm-hmm.
generational impact of marginalization and discrimination, and the list goes on and on.
Mm-hmm.
And this has really impacted this community over the years. So, in terms of suicide, the various and number of communities are known to be really, really prone to suicide. And I kid you not, their number is really high. When you
Mm-hmm.
compare it even with the number of deaths that are committed in Canada, in terms of statistically, you realize that the community is really, really suffering. I remember a few years ago, there is this documentary. They call it Third World Canada. So if maybe the listeners would take the time to Google it, you can get maybe excerpts of it, some aspects of it. And it speaks to the hopelessness in one indigenous community to the extent that people tended to commit suicide all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Like one particular family, you have the mother, you have the father, you have the children attempting it, and it's really that bad. And the challenge that we have is we live in Canada where we describe ourselves as a developed, and more often
Yeah.
than not, people use the word first world nation.
Yeah.
When we live in, it's a developed country, and we have communities within our country that are really living in such conditions where maybe they have no hope for the future and other things, I believe that it speaks volumes. It speaks
Mhm.
to the fact that irrespective of the the way we position ourselves, as a country that cares about the marginalized, oppressed, and the discriminated against, and yet within our backyard we have people struggling, then that tells us that something is not right somewhere.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, so you know, um, there's another fact that kind of bothers me. You hear a lot about young people committing suicide, right? And a lot of times when you hear about young people committing suicide, you will often hear that they were bullied in school,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
So my question is that if a child is being bullied in school,
mhm.
does having a solid family support, can it sort of prevent that child from committing suicide? The reason I'm asking is that in life, there will be issues. Everywhere you go, there would be pressure. But why do some young people, I want to focus more in this question on these young people who have so much life ahead of them, but are choosing the option of committing suicide. And then my question is, could having a solid home, I mean, I'm not saying a perfect home, but a home where the child feels loved and cared for, could that help with that situation?
Yeah, it could, and I think a solid family environment plays a very important role. Where the kid feels comfortable, feels heard, and being able to engage in conversations and other things. Because when you look at statistically the number of people, particularly youngsters who kill themselves, a lot of them keep to themselves in
Mm-hmm.
terms of not opening up to families and
Mm-hmm.
sharing because of number one, feeling that they're not going to hear me.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, these days we hear this a lot amongst, particularly among immigrant families. My parents have African mentality. So if I share things with them, they're not going to look at it from my perspective. And
Mm-hmm.
that also contributes to that because they feel that there are certain things they may not, the parents wouldn't understand. And also, when you look through the literature, particularly among the youngsters, we have a high number of attempted suicide, and even being successful at committing it among
Mm-hmm.
teenagers who are identified as part of the LGBTQ.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of them they feel that as Africans, because a lot of Africans do not embrace that lifestyle and what have
Right.
you. They may be kicked out of the home and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of them, out of despair or desperation or what have you, they also engage in that. So yes, the number is really high, but what is important within the community is the support system. Being letting them know that they are being heard, they are being supported. And also, aside from that, there are also young girls and even boys who are bullied online. And some of them, they don't feel they can discuss that with family. They
Mm-hmm.
may be misunderstood, or maybe the parents will tell them, hey, I mean, move on. You need to be tough. Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe when I was in my country, I went through all these things and nothing of this nature happened. So you can
Mm-hmm.
do with it. But I think it's important. We need to realize that the kids that we have in this part of the world are dealing with different issues altogether.
Mm-hmm.
In the school system, some of them are dealing with self-esteem. They're dealing with the fact that they are racialized, and the list goes on and on. The way they are taunted on the playground and other things adds to the stress, and it
Mm-hmm.
affects their mental well-being. And when
Mm-hmm.
we talk about teenagers and what have you, I mean, youngsters, the youth, for a lot of them, their brains are not yet developed where they are mature enough to be able to deal with the challenges that come their way. Hence,
Mm-hmm.
some of them they feel they may want to end it all.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned like immigrant families, young people within the LGBTQ community and all that. As a parent who, this is a difficult subject when it comes to immigrant families. The mothers and fathers themselves are dealing with their own issues, right? Let's say they've come from a war-torn country or they left their country in distress and they're here, right? Yeah, they'll be given a place to stay, clothes here, clothes there, but there's that mental health issue. So when they send their child to school, who let's help the parents understand what their child may be facing. I'm trying to, as you speak, I'm trying to draw us into what some families may be facing, who themselves, the parents themselves, are not equipped with the right tools, already dealing with their own issues. And we know this, right? So then when they send their child to school, how do we help the parents help the child? Because it's going to be a long time before they assimilate into the system and begin to move on, go on in life.
Right. There are a number of factors here. And I think we are fortunate in this part of the world because as immigrants, there are tons of resources that are available for us to explore.
Mm-hmm.
Tons, I mean, resources in the sense that we have counselors in the school system, we have counselors in the community, we have counselors even at our places of work, depending on where you work. But because for a lot of us coming from, let me use a place like Ghana or Nigeria as an example, we don't, I mean, when you tell somebody that you're going to see a therapist, the first thought that comes to that person's mind is, hey, this buddy's maybe crazy or something, I'm sorry I'm
Or
using
the
the word
person
crazy.
is spoiled. Hey,
That's,
you there, you came to
yeah.
Abuchi, and now you're going to, and the way we say it, now you're going to therapy.
No, I'm looking at it from maybe living in Ghana and
Oh,
trying to
okay.
access that, right? So when you come to this part of the world and somebody says, well, I'm going to see a therapist, a lot of them feel, hey, why would you want to do that? I mean, I survived without therapy, in
Mm-hmm.
Ghana. So if I'm in this part of the world, why do I have to access these services? I mean, I'll do okay anyway without that. And also they tend to look down on people who access those services.
Yeah.
So I think we have to change our mindset, our thought process with regard to these issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
This morning I was reading an article about a young lady in um, Quebec
Mm-hmm.
who had won the Rhodes Scholarship. And this lady is from, I think, Laval University or something. And she talked about one of the things that sustained her because she was diagnosed with depression when she was in high school. And she faced a number of challenges. And what sustained her is the fact that she had to go to therapy. So she doesn't
Mm-hmm.
play with it. And when she went to university, she formed a group that talks about, I think, stigma oriented. So trying to destigmatize this idea of mental illness,
Mm-hmm.
being like, crazy and being ostracized in society. So I think it's about time we change our thought process in embracing and realizing that these services are there for us and we need to utilize them for our own self sanity and also for our children as well. It's really, really important.
It's
And I think
critical, actually.
yeah, and I think our children go through a lot. They go through
Mm-hmm.
a lot, and we need to respect what they tell us,
Mm-hmm.
hear them and express the willingness to work with them. Some of them will say, well, we brought you to this part of the world. Look at how you are behaving. Look at what you are doing. We have no, I mean, these kids have no choice. They are living in a different culture altogether,
Yes.
different
Mm-hmm.
culture altogether. So we don't have to expect them to live like Nigerians or even Ghanaians I mean, in their lives. I mean, they are being brought up in a Canadian environment, and
Yes.
definitely they would embrace, what goes on in the society.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in dealing with you, I'm looking at the parent and the child, right?
Mhm.
So even from my own experience, whilst you're dealing with your children, your mentality is different because you grew up in a different culture. Their mentality is different, right? Here, when they go to school, they give them deeper understanding of things, right? So how do we as adults in these young people's lives, because we can't forget that we also have our own issues that maybe we never even resolved, but now we have these young people that we have to nurture, that we have to raise, and they're going through their own thing. How do we as parents, as adults, support that young person so you don't send them off the edge with things that you say, things that you do? How do you work with them to know that you're their ally? How do we work with them?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and I think as parents we need to have some form of, I mean, be there for them, letting them know that we are there for them no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Expressing interest in activities that they are engaged in. and perhaps in certain homes, if they are interested in sports, being with them, going through, and also connecting with their school. Because
Mm.
there's been a couple of studies that have come up that shows that a lot of particularly African parents do not show interest, even though they want their children to do well, because of their commitment to work and other things. They do not show up for activities that pertains to the child's academic work. So let's say teacher parent meetings relating to making decisions with regard to the school and other things. But as parents, I think we need to go the extra mile in terms of showing up, letting them know that we really are there for our children. And also, if there is a need for changes to be made in the school, push for it, because our children are coping or dealing with a lot. Some of
Mhm.
them go to schools where they consider themselves perhaps maybe amongst the handful of people of color within the school system. How do
Mhm.
you cope? These are some of the challenges that they deal at a younger age, a very young age.
Mhm.
And the statistics that is out there in terms of the number of people, particularly from the Black community, who do not graduate high school. Why is that so? It's not because these kids are incapable, but it's
Yeah.
because the school system is created. It has a Eurocentric way of educating these children, and some
Mhm.
of them, they learn differently. And I
Mhm.
believe that our authorities haven't really come to that point of designing the school system to engage these
Mhm.
racialized kids. And these are some of the challenges that we are facing. So, as parents, we need to be able to advocate on the behalf of our children.
Mhm. Mhm. So many immigrant parents sort of feel like they don't have the power. They feel like they don't have the right. They feel like nobody will be listening to them. Partly because maybe in their country they were not listened to, they were not seen, they were not heard, right? But as a society, how do we let, I know it's a difficult thing, but how do we help parents understand that you have the power? I mean, I work with a lot of women, immigrant women, and sometimes some of them even talk in a whisper, right? Because maybe, you're not supposed to say that, you're not supposed to say that. But how does society, a country like Canada, help such parents? Because, when you have, let's say one mother has 3 children and she's not mentally okay, but doesn't even know that she's not mentally okay. And these kids are growing up in Canada. They're very bold. They're very aggressive. They're dealing with their own. At first, it was just school. Now it's social media. How does a mother deal with this? Because a lot of times I see that the father has his own issues as well. So the whole thing becomes very like war. How do we help a mother like that who
Right.
is struggling herself?
Right. So you talked about you touched on a few things. So let me start with when you talked about when you said a mother maybe being seen but not heard. And
Mm-hmm.
it happens all the time in our school system, especially when you are racialized. You go
Mm-hmm.
to meetings, you make a comment, and nobody says anything. And then somebody from the dominant group may make that same comment, maybe with a slight twist to it, and it's like, revelation from heaven. Those things. It
Yes,
happens a lot.
yes.
And at times, some of these things, they affect your self-esteem and not wanting to
Mm-hmm.
go to such meetings and what have you. But what I would say is we don't have to lose hope. We don't have to give up. We don't have to despair, because at the end of the day, it's the interest of our children that we care about. So in
Mm-hmm.
a situation like this, what you need to do is perhaps maybe you may want to create some form of an allyship. Is
Mm-hmm.
there the possibility of mothers with children in the same school within the same vicinity? Can
Mm-hmm.
they band together periodically sharing ideas in terms of their struggles and other things? Because there's this saying that there's strength in numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And if the parents can come together and let the authorities know that they know what they are talking about,
Mm-hmm.
they can make a difference.
Yes.
And have about even just about 5 parents who are
Mm-hmm.
committed to the well-being of their children, and they'll be
Mm-hmm.
surprised the impact that
They
they
can
can make in
make.
the school. Because we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that our school system is a product of the systemic racism that we encounter on a regular basis and other things, right?
Yes.
So the school, they may say all kinds of things, but the curriculum, the way they do things and everything is geared towards the Eurocentric approach, right?
Right.
So how can we as parents also let them know that we have kids who have to be treated differently?
Right.
And I mean, there's so much we can do. So, forming some form of an allyship with a group of people, or
Okay.
you talked about women, perhaps maybe the person mentally not well. So my assumption is perhaps maybe not being diagnosed, but maybe not feeling very well. So
Mm-hmm.
how can this woman maybe get the needed support? Maybe seeing a counselor or what have you. And I believe the counselor may be there for this woman in terms of providing some form of guidelines and what she has to do, various steps that she can take to improve her
Mm-hmm.
condition and that of her children as well. So there's a lot we can do. We have I mean, there's so much we can do.
I like that you say there's so much you can do. So now I'm going back to something you said earlier about parents being there to support their children. And for example, I used to be chair of parent council in a school that had a lot of Ghanaian students. But when it came to activities, I noticed you hardly see those parents, right? What I also saw was that those kids whose parents constantly showed up were very confident. You know what I mean? So, all of this, we don't show up. I'm not saying just Ghanaian parents, I would say immigrant parents, right? But yet, we expect these young people to go on and become a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, and this. Tell me what kind of pressure we put on those children when we don't participate in their activities, but set bars that even we didn't even go halfway with that. Could that cause so much stress for the child and lead to suicide?
Um, in terms of the bars that we set for our children, I think that can be another a conversation for another day. I say that
Mhm.
because it entails quite a bit. Because at the end of the day, we can set the bars for our kids, and they can attain them. But the question is, would they be happy? And what is important
Mm.
is ensuring that kids enjoy what they do and not what mommy or daddy wants them to do, right? So,
Mhm.
I mean, I wouldn't go into details with
That's
maybe some of the
another
things.
topic.
Yeah. But looking at it in terms of the role of the parents and other things, I think within some immigrant families, I wouldn't want to generalize.
Yeah.
What happens is that, a lot of them find themselves working two, three jobs,
Hmm.
and wanting to have perhaps maybe achieve the Canadian dream, or I don't know what kind of dream. So trying to work hard, either that or perhaps maybe even trying to put food on the table because they
Hmm.
have children and they have to take care of them and what have you.
Yes.
So it's difficult, they can't leave work. So what they do is you come home, you have instructions for you. Mom wants you to do A, B, C, and then do this. And at times, even by the time you go to bed, mom or dad isn't home yet. So I think we have this. I mean, there's a lot going on for us, and some of us, even if we have the time, there are other things we may want to do. And we
Hmm.
are not used to that because we come from a culture where maybe going to school, parents never showed up, at such
Hmm.
ages and things. So those are some of the challenges that we have, and it's really difficult. But having said that, does not necessarily mean it's causation for kids committing suicide.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, if a child has some form of um, mental illness, or maybe or struggling with some of the things that we've talked about, the challenges and other things, the tendency for the kid to do something like that is high because the support is not there. They are by
Hmm.
themselves, and these days you can just go online and get all kinds of information and other things. And if you are being abused and other things, you keep it to yourself and you plan it and you can do it. So there are a number of factors that can contribute to suicide amongst these individuals. Yeah.
Okay. So, what are some of the symptoms that we should look out for, among our friends and our family? What are some of the symptoms that maybe as we're dealing with our friends and as we're dealing with family, we may be able to, help that person who maybe you don't see struggling, but you know that something is off? What are some things that we can do, and what are some of the signs?
In fact, what I would say is suicide is something that is really difficult to diagnose.
Mm-hmm.
It is really difficult. But what I would say is that I'll share a few things because there are a number of factors that makes somebody more prone to doing that, you know. So we'll talk about maybe individuals who perhaps maybe were abused as children, physically abused, sexually abused, or what have you. There's something we describe as intrapsychic, you know, so the struggle is within. There is some form of anger and other things over the years that is really boiling. And if there's no outlet in terms of counseling and other things for you to do it, you grow with it and it affects your relationships. And at times it brings you to that point of wanting to end it all. And at times it ends in maybe you being diagnosed with some form of depression, and the list goes on. And the opportune time, as you know, time goes on, you get to a point where you may want to commit suicide. So that could be a factor. That could be something that we need to be looking at. And also, you did talk about your question. You did talk about what brings us. How can we correct that? Is that right? If I got you
How
correct?
can we help a
Yes.
person?
So,
Yeah.
so what is really important is that I think we being there for family members that we see going through some of these mental health issues. You know, if they have depression and other things, being there for them and encouraging them to seek therapy, you know, to seek counseling and support, because our community, we don't do that at all. And the therapist, a lot of therapists, what they do is when you come, they assess your suicide risk. You know, and some of the assessment, based on the assessment, some of the questions they may ask is whether you intend committing suicide. And if yes, what are the plans that you have? And some clients may be honest with you and tell you, yes, I have plans. Maybe I have some drugs sitting somewhere that I plan on taking them and what have you. Some will say, maybe I have a gun under my belt and all those things. So if they are honest with you and they open up, that is where you, the therapist or the counselor, would want to engage in conversation and asking them about things that they hold dear to them. If the person is married with children, how do your children, I mean, how much do you love your children? How much do they mean to you when you live this world? How do you think this is going to impact them? When you have that engagement, it brings their mind to reality, realizing that, yes, well, by leaving, they're going to cause pain and other things. So by counseling, you are able to intervene and prevent it from coming. But one thing we should not lose sight of is there are people who, when they make that determination that they want to do it, you cannot prevent them from
You're going to do
it.
it.
Happens. So let me share an example. I remember in 1999, I think I was then in British Columbia in a small community called Merit. And I remember I was a therapist in a counseling organization, and I met with this indigenous client. And we met first time, it went well and everything. We met second time, and I did the suicide assessment, because when he came, he was seriously depressed. And we did his suicide assessment and everything. He told me he didn't intend killing himself. Everything was okay. He has family and what have you. So, assuming I met this individual on a Friday, the Monday or Tuesday, I went to work, and my boss called me to office and said, hey, this is what had happened. The individual committed suicide. And I just come out of social work school, and my first experience, you know, encounter with a client who had committed suicide, and it ate me up. At that point, my supervisor called me and said, hey, Magnus, you don't have to take this personally. Why? Because if the person wants to do it, no matter what you do, no matter the intervention,
yes,
it's going to happen. However, we live in a world where, particularly in this part of the world, we tend to isolate ourselves. We think about I, me, and you know, me and I, what have you. But I think it's about time we start reaching out to others. You know, more so around this time of the year. Christmas is coming, and you know, people feel isolated from family and other things. This is the time for us to reach out to one another, be there for them and support them. And when they are going through the blues, and also with the weather changing, there is something we call a seasonal affective disorder, a form of depression around this time of year because of the gloominess and other things. And this is the time for us to reach out and be supportive of friends and let them know that we are there for them. You know, so there are ways. But you know, for unfortunately, because for instance, Anthony Bourdain that you talked about, this individual is a celebrity.
yes,
Robin Williams, celebrity. So if there was support, these would have been people. These people would have gotten that support.
exactly my point.
Yeah, so it's difficult to really identify. Some would come and say, hey, I'm having suicidal ideation. And sometimes when you meet them in counseling, they will tell you, and you put together a plan, a supportive plan, and checking on them periodically. So I remember there's this program that was put in place in Alberta, particularly Edmonton. and its surrounding areas. And there's this individual, I mean, right now he's moved from Alberta to Nova Scotia, Ghanaian psychiatrist, Dr. Japon. And they call it Text for Hope. And what he does is that after the initial session and intervention with clients, every day they receive a text that
Okay.
a test of encouragement, motivation, or something. And
Okay.
studies have proven that for a lot of people with these depression and some of these mental health issues and things, they found it really helpful. And the
Okay.
feedback has really been great. The number is really high. I think about 70 or something percent talking about how that has impacted them. So
Okay.
for us, perhaps we may not have to even text for hope, but we can just pick up the phone and call and say, hey, Jane Doe or John Doe, how are you doing today? Just need my thoughts. I'm praying for you or something. Even that in itself can make a difference. We all go through cycles in life, challenges,
Yes.
and family, loved ones, and other things play a significant role. So I
Mhm.
think it's really important that we are there for people like that. Yeah.
So, would you say that showing care, um, showing care, letting the person know, even if they're not reaching out to you, you reaching out to them could help ease their struggle and their anxiety? Because sometimes you may think, well, the person is not reaching out to me. Maybe they don't need me. Or maybe if I keep calling them, I'll be harassing them. Sometimes you think that way. So could it be that you should reach out anyway? You know, is that okay? Because
Uh,
sometimes you hear people say you should know your boundaries. Rah, rah, rah.
it is very true. We all need to set boundaries in life, but there are some relationships that perhaps maybe we need to go beyond the idea of setting boundaries. Because the question we need to ask ourselves is, assuming you have a loved one or somebody that you're close to or somebody that you have a relationship with, and hearing that this person had died as a result of it, how are you going to deal with it?
Mm-hmm.
At times you're going to blame yourself, you're going to question why you didn't intervene and things. So at times it goes beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
And what is important is especially when you're struggling with something like depression and other things, the first thing that comes to mind is you want to be left alone.
Mm-hmm.
Some they have blinds, dark blinds that they cover their windows and things, and all
Yeah.
that they want to do is just sleep. All that they
Mm-hmm.
want to do is stay away from people. All that they want to do is not engage with other
Mm-hmm.
people. So this
Mm-hmm.
is where we come in and
Mm-hmm.
going the extra mile in terms of supporting them and being with them. So we need to let go. I don't think we need to hold on to that thought process of perhaps maybe am I smothering, this person
Mm-hmm.
or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But the question is, how can you show love? How can you show affection?
Mm-hmm.
In certain cultures or certain religious beliefs, people say, "What would Jesus do?" Right? So I think it's important for us to go the extra mile in terms of investing in the lives of these loved ones. But having said that, one of the things I want to say is that in our culture, particularly in the immigrant community, we don't want to talk about mental health at all.
No.
We don't want to talk about it. But looking at it, statistics that are out there speaks to the fact that there are about 4 to 5. The percentage is 1 out of every 4 to 5 individuals experiences mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Either you experience it personally, you have a family member, a colleague, or what have you. Mental health doesn't know color, it doesn't know money in terms of socioeconomic status or what have you. When it hits, it hits.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to look beyond that and ask ourselves, how can we take care of ourselves? Number one. Number two, how can we be supportive of other people?
Mm-hmm.
And number three, ensuring that when we go and we are giving medication, we just follow the regimen in terms of the protocol that is required of you to take care of ourselves because
Mm-hmm.
it's important. It is
Mm-hmm.
important. Taking
Mm-hmm.
care of the health. Usually, what I say is there is no health without mental health.
Mm.
And it's important we look at it that way because a lot of people, we want to talk about other parts of our body, but when it comes to the head, nobody wants to talk about it. The less we talk about it, the better. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more of a cultural thing and also the stigma that is associated with it that also creates some of these challenges.
Okay. So let's say, this is me, Anna, here, and today I'm depressed.
Mhm,
I don't want to talk to anybody.
mhm,
I don't want anybody to call me.
mhm,
I just want to be left alone.
mhm,
And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking maybe I'm better off not here. Tell me, what are some of the things I could do for myself to get myself out of that dark place? Because
Mhm,
remember, I've blocked everybody.
mhm,
I don't want anybody to connect with me or get in
mhm,
touch with me.
mhm,
Tell me
mhm,
what I can do
mhm,
myself to
mhm,
bring myself out of this dark place that I've, I'm in or have put myself in.
mhm. Yeah, so talking about this idea of being in a dark place, I think it varies from one person to the other.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in a dark place, it's really difficult to get you. I mean, a lot of people don't wouldn't have that motivation
Mm-hmm.
to get out of that place.
Mm-hmm.
Because the more you are in that place, at that place, the more you think about yourself and you think about the negativity.
Mm-hmm.
This person doesn't love me, this person is this, and and you feed on it and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
It's only a few people who would really be motivated to want to maybe call a doctor and say, this is what I'm going through and this is what is happening. Call a loved one and say, hey, today I'm not feeling good. I mean, doesn't look like it's okay. Is there any way we can find, we can look at it, and all those things. So I think it varies from individual to individual, but what is important is we realizing that there are resources all over, resources all over. Even I think
Mm-hmm.
you have a suicide hotline that you can call and say, hey, this is how I'm feeling today, and you can get somebody to talk to. So there are
Mm-hmm.
resources all over, and we need to look at it from that perspective. And I think when we look at it from that perspective, it helps a great deal. The question that you asked was really created, brought to mind something that somebody sent a couple of months ago. If you don't mind, I can read it to you. I can
Yes,
read it.
yes, please.
And it has to do with an individual who happened to be successful. Everything seemed to be going for this individual, and out of the blues, this person committed suicide. And I had permission from my LinkedIn friend, who said, well, I could share it, so I can do that. So with permission from my LinkedIn buddy, I think I'll just read this letter. So this
Okay.
is how it goes. He says, my friend Grant, one of the kindest persons ever, so selfless and caring, he ran his business where I am the director, like a family. Staff meetings were conversations, appraisals were advice sessions, board meetings were sometimes held at restaurants whilst chatting. It was unconventional, but very, very effective.
Mm-hmm.
Grant had a PhD, enjoyed a stellar career in different continents, and rose to the top of his field before branching into business. He often told me, I'm building the business to guarantee each staff an employment. Then I'll retire to enjoy my life with my wife in Portugal, gazing at the sunset and swimming in the ocean. Unsurprisingly, once the business became somewhat profitable, Grant quit as CEO. They bought a house in Portugal and retired to enjoy life near the sea, just as he had imagined in his golden 50s. The business struggled but survived, with the staff stepping up to fill the big void. A finance assistant we hired 8 years ago is now the general manager, and the business had not only survived but thrived. And they lived happily ever after, right? And he said,
Right.
not quiet. After retiring, Grant became very worried about many little things, which started to cause insomnia. It affected his high blood pressure, his physical and mental health. Little things like not working full time for the first time, whether the business will survive, if he had made the right choices, whether he had lived a good life, and the list goes on and on and on. To me, his was a textbook example of a good life, well educated with a PhD, well traveled all over the world, successful career, managing director at a large company, successful entrepreneur with over 30 plus employees, retired to a beach house in Portugal, and a wonderful wife of 30 plus years with children and grandchildren. Yet, these little things troubled him. He thus decided to embark on a cruise, away from all the worries, so that he could hopefully relax. We spoke a few weeks before the cruise, and he was looking forward to it. I was very happy for them. That is him and his family.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, Grant committed suicide in the early hours of Thursday, 17th January 2019. Anxiety and depression led to his suicide. I was shattered. I somehow found the energy to attend his funeral in Portugal a week later, but couldn't stop asking myself, what is life all about? To deal
Mm.
with it, I just blocked it all out. Almost 3 years after my friend died, I only recently found the energy to grieve and to bid him a proper farewell. I also asked his wife's permission to tell the story, and she insisted I tell it fully in case it helps. Grant's death taught me to take my mental health seriously and encourage others to do same. Mental health issues can affect any of us and should concern all of us. Please speak out and seek help if you are struggling, and check in on someone when you can. So this says it all.
I like that. Take your health, your mental health seriously. And this once again takes me back to Robin Williams and Anthony Bourdain.
Mhm,
I mean, sometimes we like to put this thing on poor people and people
mhm.
who don't have money and all of that. Uneducated people. And these days, I like to say classroom educated and, be specific. But here's a gentleman who had lived quite well, worked hard, studied a lot, worked hard at his business. He had managed to go through the ups and downs of the business, and the business was thriving, but ended up committing suicide. May God be with us and help all of us so that we can understand it when we're in despair. I think we should all give up on the perfect life and accept our vulnerabilities. So, at the end of this conversation for the soul, please give us something that we can go home with to help our souls and our minds so that we can live fruitful lives no matter what we're going through.
Yeah, I would say that we shouldn't take our mental well-being lightly.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime we feel down or what have you, we live in an environment where we can always check in. Usually we use the word shrink. You can check in with a psychiatrist or a psychologist or what have you. That doesn't make us less of a person, but it
Mm-hmm.
makes us better people. you
Mm-hmm.
know so once in a while, if we can have that checkup and other things, is really necessary. If I can go for physical checkup, why can't I go for mental checkup? So what I would encourage each and every one of us is, if we can get somebody, that periodically we can touch base with and what have you, it's great. There's also one thing that I want to talk about. There's something we call toxic masculinity,
Mm-hmm.
where, because suicide amongst men, in terms of suicide, more men commit suicide than women, even
Okay.
though more women attempt it.
Okay.
But more men. I mean, the statistics that is out there looks as if it's one to two or something.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, why is it that men do it? We've been socialized to think along certain lines. Be a tough guy. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have to wear your emotions on your sleeve. You don't have to
Mm-hmm.
express your feelings and all those things. These things are killing us. And I think it's
Mm,
important that out of humanity, we come out and express the willingness to share what is going on with us, because
mm,
we cannot take it all. It's
mm,
important that we share our challenges and our struggles and other things. Periodically we see jokes that where people post and things. You see somebody ask the husband, how are you today? I'm good. How was work? Good. How was what have you? Good. Everything single response, single
mhm,
word response. However,
mhm,
when we talk about how was the soccer or the football, and then we are willing to talk about football but nothing else. But
and
I
come
think
alive.
we need to get to that point where we need to also be able to share what's going on with us, because it's important. And if we can do that, we can all relate well. We can save relationships. We can
Mm,
save families. We can save our children, and
mm,
we can make a life better for all of us. So I think, and also one thing that we need to develop, particularly within the immigrant community, is this idea of trust.
mhm.
We struggle with that a little bit, where
We
people
do.
feel, if I tell John Doe this, John Doe is going to tell Jane Doe, and then it's going to go. How can we build that trust amongst us so that I can share my struggles with you, not because I want to gossip or what have you, but because I know you would hear me. At times,
Mhm,
all that you need is a listening ear.
mm.
And that's all, like, what will make the difference in a person's life. So if we can avail ourselves and be there for one another, I think we can make the world a better place, and also we can touch into other people as well.
Well, Prof, you never fail. And I continue to pray that we're able to help people deal with life's issues. Have a blessed weekend. And for all of you who have been listening, I pray that you will be able to help yourself. If not, reach out to somebody. It's the Inspirational Anna Show, and stay blessed. Have a good day. Bye bye.
Thank you.